Creating your own reality. Is it possible for me? I am Jennifer K. Hill, the Consciousness Architect, and I am here to tell you that it's not only possible, it's closer than you might think. Welcome to the show. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Regarding Consciousness. I am Jennifer K. Hill, host of this show, as well as CEO of OptiMatch, App. And we love to search the world to find you some of the greatest thought leaders in business, scientists, best-selling authors, and to share wisdom on consciousness and how we can constantly be evolving our consciousness for the highest and best good of ourselves and others. And today is no exception. We have an incredible two-time best-selling author, Bryan Kramer, who is joining us today. I had the pleasure of getting to know Bryan through his wife here in Lisbon, and through some synchronicities and serendipities, we found ourselves at the same dinner table a few months ago. And ever since then, I've been excited to have Bryan come on the show and share his wisdom with you. Bryan is often called the Zen Master to digital marketers by Forbes, and is a renowned business strategist, global keynote speaker, executive trainer and coach, and Forbes contributor. He is the CEO of H2H Companies, an executive coaching company and co-owner of Pure Matter, a Silicon Valley marketing agency founded in 2001, which earned a spot as one of the fastest growing companies by the Silicon Valley Business Journal. We'll talk a little bit today as well about his two best-selling books, Human to Human, H2H, as the namesake of his company is called, as well as Shareology. So, Bryan, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. What a nice introduction. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your wisdom with our listeners and viewers. And I think I'd like that. It's so juicy, both titles, Human to Human and Shareology. It's like, where do we start with this? I think I'm feeling called to start today with a little bit about Shareology. Talk to
Mhm.
us a little bit about that and why sharing matters in our consciousness and in what we do in the world.
I'm so glad that you started with that one. It's probably the book I actually spent more time on in writing and research. It took me a year and a half to interview well over 100 people of all different types, and with one goal of why do people share? Why do humans share? And as I was researching it and as I was figuring out what that was, we had to come up with kind of some criteria and some understanding around what people share, when they share, how they share, and what is the meaning behind different types of sharing. There's one thing that as I took all of the interviews and I put them into one of those word clouds, and I took all the transcripts and I threw it in, and I figured out that the one reason that we all share is simply because every human has this one trait that we all want, which is to connect. So no matter the reason for why they're sharing, which can break down into different ways, connection is ultimately the one thing that we all have in common. We all want to connect in.
Mm.
So how we do that is can run in different ways. You might see on social media, especially, what people share and the reactions that we all get, or the way that we actually see things in our assumptions and how we see the share. So there's a lot of different idiosyncrasies. There's a lot of reasons for what's behind the share. But if we keep in mind that everybody really does want to connect, then we can unify a little bit more.
I love the word unify. It's such a beautiful word of bringing people and things and ideas together. And so when we're talking about this idea of sharing, which leads to human connection, what stops us from sharing, Bryan?
There's a certain personality type, or sometimes even a moment, when we feel like either we're not informed, which isn't all the time, unfortunately, or we don't see it as being something that we are contributing towards in others' understanding. So there's a type where we feel more at home with ourselves when we share it individually. So I might send you something privately to say, hey, take a look at this, or what do you think of this? That sharing is much more comfortable for most people than it is Even though we see on social that there's all this sharing going on, a lot of people are really more intimate or more private, intimacy into me and creating more of that kind of one-to-one nature. The reason we don't see that as often is because it is private.
Mm.
So if you were to take all of the private sharing that's going on, all the intimate sharing that's going on, it's actually way more than the public sharing that's happening. It's just that we have no way of measuring it or seeing it out loud. That's a lot easier for most of us to share something and not put ourselves out there, not be seen by most people. And that's going to encourage us not to have haters or people that are going to disagree. We get into this idea behind sharing and what we're going to create, the chaos, the ripple effect of what we do with a share. It's not going to get what we hope for in our minds. So it's a lot easier a lot of times really to share privately. That's one of the more dominant ways that we share. And I think that that is over all the other ways, probably the most comfortable.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring that up. I was reading a great business book lately called Backable, and I'm drawing a blank. I think it was Sunil Gupta. If you don't know it, it's a great book. And in the book, he talks about how he was the least backable person in the whole wide world. And literally, at one point, his face was on the cover of the New York Times as like the least investable in person ever. And he shares in his book how he became backable himself and what are the secrets he learned, whether it was Tim Ferriss writing the book, The 5 Minute Work Week, or whatever it might be, that it's all about writing something or creating something for one person and that
Mm,
really intimate sort of sharing, that's where the magic comes. I think sometimes when we try to get into the minds of masses, then things get muddled. Yet when we come from it of just deeply one to one, just sharing something, whether it's a conversation or an
mm,
idea or whatever it might be, then from that place, then people get lit by that. And could we actually create everything with that same resonance of sharing it just for one person intimately that could then reach millions or however many you want to.
mm. Yeah, I love that. Have that person on the other end in mind. Who is the best person that you want to attract with what it is that you're putting out there? I do that when I write my books. I think of the person that I want to read it and write it for that person. So that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense, especially when I'm speaking a lot. I'll imagine that one person in the audience who's the person I'm trying to speak to. I don't know if you do the same,
Mm,
but it's a lot more, I would imagine, I agree with that, that it's a lot more comfortable for us to know that we're speaking to someone with a face, someone who's real. And it's not just this broad audience of 1,000 people that are, or thousands of people that are not, that are faceless. Yeah. So there's also, and I broke this down in the book, but there's different types of ways that we feel more comfortable as who we are in sharing. So I went over the selective, which is the one way. That's the intimate way. That's the private sharing. Most of us are selectives in certain situations that just feels more comfortable to us. And then there's the connector, the boomerang, the hipster, the careerist, and the altruist. And each of these different ways allow you to know what feels most comfortable for you as you're putting more information out there. The thing I will say, and I learned this as I was writing the book, is that when you put your information out there, no matter how you put it out there, the more you share on a topic, the more they're going to identify you on that topic. So if I were to share on spreadsheets all the time and just focus on spreadsheets all the time, people would start to align their thinking with Bryan is the go-to person for spreadsheets. Or if Jennifer were to share all the time about meditation, after a while, people are going to start to see you as the meditation go to. The problem with that is that we start to turn people off when that's all we share, when it's just the only thing that we share, because now it becomes one dimensional. And that's not who we are as humans. We're not one dimensional people. We're three-dimensional human beings with a lot of different thoughts. And our sharing also needs to be put out there in that respect as well.
that is such great feedback. I've actually never heard that before, Brian. I remember when I started in social media, one of my mentors back at circa like 2008 or 9, when Twitter was coming out and LinkedIn, and I had this lovely mentor who had taught me to share articles that you've written on a topic, but then share articles at the time for me, it was recruiting because that was the company I was building, and then share articles other people have written to set yourself up as the expert. Though I like what you're saying is that, yes, you could be the expert in recruiting or meditation or connection, though holistically, there's so much more than being an expert in one of those areas. What are the nuances and layers? Because otherwise, people would lose interest after a while. If I'm just
Mhm.
talking at you and sharing the same thing over and over about connection or consciousness,
Yeah.
then people might get burned out by it.
That's exactly right. But you know why? That's why we get turned off of most company pages that are sharing information. If you look at companies that are sharing like Intuit, they're sharing on QuickBooks all the time. There's only so much I can take on that topic. And also I want to know more about who's inside the company. What are they doing? What's the fun things that are going on? There's so many different layers to a company. We all know that. And yet the on the surface level, or if you were to look at Instagram and look at the surface level of what's being shared, it's very flat. And so when we start to create that three-dimensional approach, and we're talking a lot on social media because it's more prevalent, we could see it. But this is the same in real life too. This is when we're in conversation with another human. If we're speaking on multi-dimensional levels of all the things that make us up, of course we have to peel the onion eventually to get there, but the same thing applies. That's going to create the more interest. It's gonna create more, eventually more connection.
Mm, beautiful. And I want to backtrack for a moment because we glossed over some of the other types that you mentioned, such as the boomerang or the hipster. Would love for you to elaborate a little bit more on those. Inquiring minds want to know, speaking of multiple dimensions.
Yeah, no problem. So I talked about the selective. That's the person who likes to share privately. They're more comfortable one-on-one. They're very intimate in nature. The connector is someone who likes to connect other people to each other. So they are constantly thinking, how can I introduce two or more people? And I have a person for you. Can I make sure that I encourage you to meet with this person and be on their podcast? They're very good at that. And they're always putting themselves out for helping others first before themselves. I love connectors. And LinkedIn is basically a connector platform. When you look at it's all a lot of different things, but when you look at it at the heart of what it can do is being a connector platform. The boomerang is interesting. The boomerang has a couple different meanings. It can be someone who is a good orchestrator or manager or social media manager. They're great at posing questions and getting community or people together and creating that community. They also can be trolls, where a boomerang is going to hit you with something only to hit you back with something else and hit you back with something else until they are continually being right or in the right. So a boomerang loves to ask questions. Now, is it on the light side or the dark side? That's the question. The hipster, or what I like to call the early adopter. The early adopter is someone who loves to learn things that come out almost immediately. Like when something just new technology or a new technique comes out, they love to learn it and turn around and teach it to somebody else. They are educators at heart. They're also early adopters. They just like to get their hands on the newest, greatest thing and share that with others. The careerist is a thought leader. They're going to share a lot of educational pieces and they're going to write a lot. They're going to create a lot of potentially articles or ways that people can tap into the thing that they want to learn. And finally, the altruist, which I always love explaining, is the heart sharer. This is someone who shares, you can tell like when you read something that they've shared or when they're sharing it, it's really coming from this resonant heart space. And they're putting it out into the world out of love or out of passion. So yeah, those are the six. You can bounce between all of them. I think people should bounce between all of them. It's more endearing when you bounce between all of them. And it also creates what I was talking before with people being more resonant with and connecting into who you actually are when you are doing a lot more of than just one.
I think it's a great point. I always like to personally look at all things, whether it's numerology, astrology, typing systems, even our own typing system at OptiMatch, is that As we evolve, I feel like we eventually begin to embody all aspects of everything, which then allows us to be more fluid and compassionate and less judgmental and more available to give and receive freely to share, to your point in shareology is it does take a deep compassion and understanding of every type and a willingness to engage in it to some extent rather than poo-pooing it or saying, oh, selective. Oh, I can't stand those selective types. That's not good. It's human nature to put ourselves in boxes and to judge one type as good or bad. Though I would even encourage out those of you out there listening or watching to see which one you feel most resonant with. I'm going to come up with an exercise here, Brian, and tell me if this is a good idea since you're the guy who created it. What if we wrote down those six types and then we ranked them from one to six of what we're naturally most driven towards and where we feel most resonant to the one that we're like, oh, God, yeah, don't make me do that one. And then what if we challenged ourselves once a
Mhm.
week and we at least made the effort to share in a way that's uncomfortable for us?
Mm. Yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah, it just
Yeah.
makes there was a great Kabbalistic analogy years ago that they said, or not an adage rather, they said, give the thing that's hardest for you to give. So if you have time, give money. If you have money, give time, and always
Mm.
giving the thing that causes you to stretch and expand and grow yourself.
Mm. Amen. I and it's not easy at first, but like everything, it's a muscle that you can build. And one of the things that I think would be beneficial to also add on to each of those is where is your come from? Because the come from might be something, there's two different ways that we as humans share at the base root of what we feel like we need from a conversation. So all of these apply to that base root come from. And that come from is either one of two things. One, I want to be right, or one, I want to learn more. And if your come from is I want to learn more, then you're always going to be sharing no matter what and coming from a good place. And it's going to be more resonant with others. Yes, challenge yourself to go into being an early adopter if that's not your thing. And make sure that your come from is from learning more or helping to educate. Out of that goodness is where the connection is made.
I think that is such an important context, and it's helpful to understand that the come from is really everything. The context is decisive, as my friend Joss always says. So, on that note, was there anything that surprised you as you've been studying human beings for these last 20, 30 years, Brian? You're a prolific writer and thought leader and creator yourself. Surprised you the most, either in researching H2H or in shareology? Tell us a little bit about that.
What surprised me the most is that humans want to engage with humans more so now more than ever. That I didn't realize that HH would be around this long. I thought that it would be like a one year or 2 year blip. And it ended up in 2014 when I wrote it, and previous to that, speaking about it being something that caught the a global eye. And I thought that it would be the fad, if you will, of the year with Fast Company and Inc. and all these magazines calling it the word of the year. And I thought then, okay, that's going to be a good year. That's great. And it ended up like being more important as it went. So now here we are more than 10 years later, and we have AI, and we've got augmented reality, and we have virtual reality, and we have all these things, and we're starting bots and automation, and the list goes on. So you can rest medicine, and everybody is more ingrained. It's more important now than ever to people to connect. And I think there's a nervousness or a scare that's coming in a lot of people's minds that I've talked to about what does this mean for humanity? What do all these technologies and all these things mean for me in my role, in my job? Am I going to be replaced? These are all questions going on in everyone's minds. And I think they're really important questions that we need to be putting out there. And I would also say that everything is cyclical. that we have had as far back as we can even write. We've had door-to-door salespeople. And then fast forward, we had the communication, we had the printing press. And then we had the internet, and then we are going to go into a new era, and all of these things are going to create a dominant force for our behavior to need, to desire more communication, more connection. It's going to push us more into wanting to be with each other. As much as we want to cocoon, it's going to push us further together. So that's the thing that surprised me, to be honest with you. I really thought it was a social media era thing, and it's not. It's just getting more important to everybody as we go.
And I want to give everybody context in case I didn't go into it earlier. His book, H2H, the one that came out in 2014, is Human to Human. And that was meant, correct me if I'm wrong, Bryan, to replace this idea of B2B, B2C, whatever it was. And you were looking to reimagine, what if we stop looking at it as business to business or business to consumer? What if we just looked at it as human to human, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And no matter what company we have, we all want to know that there's a human at the other end and connecting with whoever that is. And that really got reshaped in 2010 to 2015 when the geofences got dropped and we were able to have communication with people around the world. We were able to talk to people within companies. We didn't have to call a 1-800 phone line to get our pizza delivered on time when it wasn't delivered appropriately. Now, all of a sudden, we had access to a public forum that we're able to go on to and say, where's my pizza? What do companies do with that? How do they communicate on that? What do they do when other people are looking at this information? And now we look back at it, and I think it's table stakes, even though we still have a lot of work to do, but it's table stakes for us to see that this is a normality of how we communicate online, verbally, or whatever. And it's now just become a different platform of communication here 10 years later. We're now looking at how can companies utilize more human truth moments, more moments that can tell a customer, hey, I'm here. I'm going to communicate with you when you need me. I'm going to be more responsive now using these technologies, but I'm also going to have a human voice when you need me. And so this is just flipped into a new problem to have, but the problem hasn't gone away.
Agreed. I remember I was having a conversation in the Bay Area when I was out there in February of this year with a thought leader in the space. And he was saying, Jen, authenticity, trust, and human connection are going to be the currencies of the future, because with the emergence of AI, we're going to be more dependent than ever before on real human connection and authentic human connection, and being able to trust that the person on the other side even is a human, which is a bigger, more in-depth conversation that we could get into.
Yeah, and I love those, especially that word trust. It's something that's fascinating to me right now, and I could go into, like you said, another 5 hours of podcast, but I won't. The pillars that I broke down in H to H, I think still stand for what makes a company or a person the most human connectable, the most highest connectable human or company, which is empathy, simplicity, and imperfect. Those are the three things that we actually push away when we do things that are a little more challenging. So for instance, if you look at companies across the board that are simple, that are easy to understand, easy to order, easy to talk to, simple, easy. There's not that many. You might have some that you can call up, but why aren't there more? And then you look at empathy and you think of brands or people that are really taking care of their customer. Are they fast? Are they having human moments? Where are they? Or empathy for in ways that you see in the world and how they show up in human crisis, or for their employees. Those are far and few between. And then you also last look at imperfection, the ones that show up when things don't go well. And how do they show up? And how do we get more endeared or push them away almost quickly? Like within an hour, you can easily say, I'm never shopping there again. Maybe even a heartbeat because of something that happened, and them not taking that imperfect moment and turning it into a human moment. So if we could take these three things and we could combine them into propping them up as things that we're proud of, that we can use as measurements. And like you said before with the types, we could take them at 10 out of 10 and where to rate them. Simplicity, where do we stand? Empathy, where do we stand? Imperfection, where do we stand? And start to really build on each of these, then we're going to start to get more endeared towards companies than ever before.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Since I've come out as, "Hi, I'm Jen Hill. I'm a recovering jerk. Nice to meet you." I used to hide that because I was such a jerk when I was building my first company, and before I knew I was on the spectrum, I just didn't know how to communicate with people, and I found it overwhelming the sense of belonging I found in the world by just being authentic with people and being like, "Hey guys, I was a jerk. I was a jerk to myself. I was a jerk to others." And then all of a sudden, people who I didn't even have close relationships with years ago are like, "Thank you for sharing that. I've been a bit of a jerk myself." And I think that's the piece that you're talking about is really transparent accountability. I think it's one of my greatest values is can we be 100% transparent and accountable and utilize that as lessons to teach others rather than trying to push it under the rug, be like, "Oh, Brian, I got to share this thing that happened with you." And just really being authentic about it. I
Mm.
think that's going to shift the world and how we relate to it.
Oh, imagine that. Imagine a world that operates from that place. That would just be gorgeous. I would love that if everyone could live there in the moment and be that authentic self. That would just be beautiful. I think going back to that word trust, it would start to build trust so much faster.
100%. And so, on that note, Brian, is there anything that I didn't get to ask you today, or anything you'd like to reiterate to our audience to leave them with a little gem before we go into where they can connect with you?
Let's see. I think we covered a lot, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I love the way that it flowed. The thing that I would say is that right now more than ever, being human is everyone's competitive advantage.
Mm,
And I want to just real quickly restate that every being human is everyone's competitive advantage. If you actually want to stand out, be more human because everything is more automated. There's more bots, there's more automation and email and all these different things that are going on. And if you do anything that's of a human mindset that's different or unique, or heck, writing a thank you note or doing some of the old world, what we call old world things, you're going to stand out more by doing those simple little acts of kindness or those simple little human conversational moments when you do that with others. Be more human. Look for the human moments of truth. Walk over to a whiteboard, map out your whole system, and then go take a step back and say, where are the human moments in all of that? And just do one or two and see how that changes everything.
very powerful words, Brian. Thank you so much. And if people want to connect with you, follow your work, find the books, book you as a speaker, where would they go to do so?
Thank you. If you go to bryankramer.com, Brian with a Y, and thanks to my mom for spelling it with a Y, and Kramer, Kramer.com, and you can sign up for my newsletter, which I will reply to in true human fashion. You may even get a video hello personalized to you. And yeah, all my stuff, all my articles and everything are there. So I'd love to connect with whoever wants to connect there.
Thank you, Brian, for helping us remember how to bring the human back into business and the value that sharing brings to the world. It's one of my favorite Kabbalistic concepts is when we receive for the sake of sharing rather than receiving for the sake of the self alone. It's from that place that we can make the difference we want to make in the world. So thank you for being with us, Bryan Kramer. Thank you to each of you for tuning in and listening. I am Jennifer K. Hill, and I wish you a week filled with opportunities for sharing.